Our keynote speaker today is Mr. Mackie from the Department of Education, Training and Employment. Ian also has been a long-time supporter of the Stronger Smarter Institute and has been responsible for many positive changes within our schools in Queensland.
To speak about Connectedness versus Truancy, a new paradigm in Indigenous education, please welcome Ian Mackie.
Thank you so much, Toby and Michelle, and good morning, everyone. But first I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Yuggera and Turrbal people, their elders past and present, and I'm sure you've been welcomed appropriately because that would be the sort of thing that Chris would do, and I congratulate Dr. Sarah, Chris, for the conduct of this event. The reason Gary's allowed me the opportunity to present by myself is because this is perhaps a swan song for me. Some of you may have read in the papers that from next Tuesday I will not be the Assistant Director General for Indigenous Education and Training Future. So that causes me some sadness, but it also causes me to reflect on where we've come from, where we are now and where we're going as a group of people so committed to improving Indigenous outcomes. I'm not one who's actually sold on closing the gap so much because I have a vision of Indigenous peoples being an elite, not so much minority if you look at the birth data, but an elite group of people who transcend current performance patterns of the general population. And I think that's achievable for a lot of our students have within the potential to do that. I'd also add the comment that in many ways I'm speaking to the wrong audience, that you congregate and that you share learnings and think about how you might achieve the vision that you have is a very important thing, and again I congratulate the Stronger Smarter Institute for that. But the strongest challenge is to get the message out to those people who are not here. Now, there are a number of devotees who are not here, so I'm not referring to those, but I am referring to the people who take the language and reconstruct it to reinforce the equilibrium. And a good example of that would be the high expectations agenda, where the words by a number of people were hijacked to mean high expectations of children, not for children, and used the language to reinforce the status quo, an equilibrium of gaps and negative outcomes. Now, I'm really excited by the language that the Stronger Smarter Institute has wrapped around that by saying it's about high expectations relationships, which infers a two-way thinking around high expectations. Not only high expectations for children, but high expectations of teachers, schools and school systems, or even high expectations for teachers, schools and school systems. So I think the challenge is to get this message to those people who would be mired in an equilibrium of today. And if you're unconvinced there's an equilibrium, I'll just share some of this data with you. And I think if I do that, you get the point that there's poor attendance, poor outcomes and poor retention. The one that probably annoys me the most is retention through to grade 12, because there's a law in this state and in other states, there's laws or at least strong policies that say you must complete grade 12. But for many of our schools and many of our teachers, that law is kind of optional, and you see lots of examples of schools that say take in 30 grade 8s or grade 7s, depending on the reception year into high school, take in 30, finish off 3 or 4, one of them gets a university entrance and there's great celebration around that, and the school purports to have high expectations. And I think probably more importantly than that, no one, the primary school feeder schools, other teachers in the school, other principals, or the community itself says, foul. That's a bad outcome. Now, conversely, I was talking to Phil in the ACT. Were you in the room, Phil? who does my job in the ACT, won. And 96 point, whatever it was, Phil, 96.4% of all students who enter high school complete. Now, when I put that data in front of high school principals, they go, well, I actually didn't know the 96.4, Phil, but I know that it's well into the 90s under your leadership, and congratulations. They say, oh, look, yeah, but the ACT, you could race around the ACT in a day. It's such a small place. You could literally know everybody. And I go, well, how's that different from a school? Because if you think about it from the school perspective, it's probably significantly smaller than the ACT, not much smaller, Phil. Certainly if you talk about Kerwin High, it's not much smaller than the ACT, albeit I shouldn't identify Kerwin High in this conversation because Kerwin High is doing some fantastic work around retention. They've probably got the ACT message. But the notion that you could know everybody, address their challenges, do whatever it takes to ensure school completion is not a crazy idea. And if you were to accept the creed of the teacher, which is, I always, rattle on about the old in loco parentis idea, the Latin for in the place of the parent. And if I had $1 million as a principal, if I had $1 for every time I'd asked a teacher as a principal, if this was your kid, would you want me to do something different? I'd be a millionaire because, I've had enough, I can't stand this kid, get him out of my hair, is not an in loco parentis role. And in loco parentis role, I don't want to get all Florence Nightingale about this, but this is the creed of teachers, that I would treat the child as if the child is my own flesh and blood. And if we were to do that, I think we can get to some of the outcomes. We can aspire to the outcomes of the ACT because it's about case and place. It's about the individual. It's about how does a camel eat a ton of hay? One mouthful at a time. How do you get 100% retention in high schools? By not chucking them out one at a time. Okay? So I focus on retention for the reason that I think it's in many ways a capstone indicator. I'll go further in the presentation to talk about, and they get jobs as a very, very significant transition, which I believe needs to be guaranteed. Something that I'm not in the least bit proud about is the gap in attendance is not closing. And I would suggest to you that the reason that the gap in attendance is not closing is too quickly people jump to the truancy paradigm. Something that I'm incredibly proud of in my intellectual contribution to this debate is drawing a distinction between truancy and connectedness. And the word connectedness, I was on a teleconference the other day and we were talking about attendance, and one of our regional directors piped up and said, oh, we've got a new word in our region for attendance, it's connectedness. And I go, oh, I wonder where you got that from, that's very clever. But if you think about the difference between attendance in terms of truancy and attendance in terms of connectedness, and take a perspectival switch. Think differently about it, and I'll use a metaphor to assist you in your thinking. If you're a restaurant owner and the patrons didn't come, would your first response be to get the coppers, go around and growl them, and threaten to take their welfare from them? That's not the sort of thing you would do as a restaurant owner. What you would do is look at the menu, look at the cook, look at the ambience, look at the welcoming experience that people have. When they've had a chance to eat at your restaurant, you'd ask them what was good and what was bad, and the bad bits you'd fix. That's the kind of thing that you would do if you were a restaurateur and you had an attendance problem. Now, I really struggle with the notion of can truancy and connectedness coexist? And I go to the metaphor of the restaurant, and that would challenge me to think, could I possibly send the coppers round, growl them and take their welfare and be nice to them at the same time? I think there's a real challenge in that. So I would ask you to move far beyond the truancy paradigm, stamp its head whenever it raises it and say, no, We're like the restaurant. If we want people to come, we need to look at the service we're offering. I think Dr. Sarah's hit the nail on the head when he says how ordinary schools must be, where kicking a can around the street is preferable to actually being at school. Outcomes again, literacy and numeracy all over the place, but certainly not heading down. And retention, in this state, the retention gap is getting greater. Now, there are excuses for this. There's always excuses. We live in a world of excuses, and I don't tend to bore you with the excuses. The simple message in that is not good enough. And I understand the Dare to Lead group is putting a significant amount of energy into the space ahead by way of working in this agenda with secondary outcomes. I put it down to a delayed reaction a little bit, ever the optimist, and the non-Indigenous kids have got the message about the law quicker, but I think that's really, really a thin excuse. We're not moving to another place, and if you think this is impossible, you shouldn't be in this room, for one, but also if you need convincing, look over the Tasman. And we had Hattie here recently railing at us about retention rates through to high school. And I just overlaid this talk with the demography debate, which I don't know if many of you had heard me talk about the demography debate. But just quickly, if you look at the demography of our country, what you find is, and the baby boomers are to blame, those born before 1965, I won't ask you to hold your hand up. It's one of those criteria where being an underachiever is a good thing. But you got that, didn't you? You like that bit? But if you're born before 1965, you are incredibly numerous, you feel entitled, and you expect Australia to continue to grow as you've experienced through your lifetime. But if you look at the number of children who are coming through, the number of children are waning. And we had this discussion around superannuation incomes because we took the pension and said, look, you're going to have to look after yourself in your old age. There's not going to be enough people working to look after you, which is a comment of itself around our society, like we can't look after our old people. When did that become a thing? I'll just share a story about my mother this morning in a moment, but who I am looking after because I think it's an important thing to look after you. The people that called you into existence. But we had the debate around superannuation and pensions. We've sort of had the debate around health in that, like health demands are going to be higher because people are older and we're going to need more money in the health system. We haven't had the debate around cost of schooling. We're sort of Gonski's teasing around at the edges, but essentially young people are lots more precious than they've ever been. And the fact that our retention rate and school completion rate and jobs for young people is about the same as it's always been is an economic time bomb. The biggest productivity challenge this nation faces is to improve the performance of our schools. Now, if you overlay that demography challenge with the demography of Indigenous young people who haven't got the message about birth rates, they're still producing young people. And last time I checked as a school teacher, that was a good thing. Because imagine a world without kids. Young children being born is good for business. That's why I always get angry at the people who talk, I think, very negatively about the baby bonus and how somehow having children is a bad thing. Just explore in your minds for a moment how stupid that is for teachers to complain about children being born. Hello? Oh, hello? That's a bit like the restaurant complaining about people not wanting to eat food. So we haven't had the debate, again, around the revaluing of children and what investment needs to be put into children to ensure they participate to the fullness of their potential, to the fullness of their cognitive ability. And if they do that, we are the net beneficiaries. We all benefit from those results improving. We've got some enrolment data there. It's instructive of itself to know that the last time all that enrolment data for every state was assembled was 2010. I'm pleased to be able to report Queensland's up dramatically on that. New South Wales is as well, and I know a number of the other states are as well. But remember, born, and that would have been in 94, there would have been 4,000 young people born roughly in 1994. So 1,500 of them finished in 2010. That's a pretty poor strike rate. So what are the other 2,500 doing? Well, they're certainly not working, or a significant proportion of them are not working, a big challenge. So I want to set out a 5-point plan. Chris has got a 5-point plan. Seems to be if you're going to be really trendy in this space, you have to have a 5-point plan. But why 5? Well, because there's 5 fingers on your hand, or that meta strategies are well organised into spaces like this. And I really take my hat off in the high expectations space to Chris. The work Dr. Sarah did around high expectations, I think, is some of the most groundbreaking thinking that has occurred in this country. The fact that it had to occur should cause us to reflect. But the work that he did by lifting the bar, and he used a whole range of metaphors like that, by a perspectival shift, by norming behaviours around strong and smart and clever, and having expectations that, I guess, are where they should be. And a good example I often give is we had this really good scholarship for Santos Oil and Gas. I don't know if you know this, but there is no Indigenous oil and gas engineer in Australia, and of course by definition the world. There's a significant number of doctors, so the medical field's done very well in this particular regard. But no oil and gas Indigenous engineer exists in the world. So Santos is pretty keen to get the very first one, and is offering serious scholarships to gifted year 11s and 12s, or certainly year 12s who would potentially study engineering. Now we went out, I went out to try and pitch the scholarship. So the best place to pitch the scholarship was to gifted year 12s, and there were 20 Indigenous grade 12s who were sort of OP1, that's for those people from other states, the highest TER ranking. That means you're a rocket scientist, like you're as clever as there is. And there were 20 across Queensland, and they were all studying maths and science, and unsurprisingly they were things like school captains and sports captains and doing volunteer work in the community, and most of them were drop dead gorgeous, and I'm sad to report most of them were girls. Because what's happening there is, I think, a challenge as well. But I always make the point around this high expectations patch. If you think the fact that there are 20 Indigenous kids who have got the highest TER ranking and are set to do engineering or medicine or whatever it is they might do, or go to Oxford or whatever, if you think that's remarkable or worth reporting, you're actually part of the problem. Because that should be, well, why aren't there 25 should be the thing you're saying but in your seats, or why aren't there 30? So the preoccupation of the press to put smiling faces of exceptional kids in the papers and all over the media is actually adding to the low expectations agenda, if you can follow that train of thought. The fact that they exist and they're doing well should be a no-brainer. But I just go to the issue of, if there are high expectations, if high expectations is to be the way forward, what is it trying to address? And the answer is low expectations. And the thing that I've been, and a group of us have been thinking hard about is, where did those low expectations come from? What's the historical basis of the low expectation? And I think it's obvious, it's racism. It's from the very earliest days of the invasion of this country, we as a group of non-Indigenous people took to the strongly held view that in our interest it would be best to be very, very negative in terms of our perspective of Indigenous people, that they somehow were second class. And if you think this is something that's gone away, in 2008, two researchers, Lee and Zhong, argued that at least a part of the poor educational performance of Indigenous Australians were due to racial factors. So in 2008, academics are writing in popular discourse that it's down to race. Now, I would strongly contend there's one race, the human race. That's the only race. And in my long experience as a principal, the differences in cognitive ability of Indigenous kids are only the same as the differences in cognitive ability of the general population. I should think we should etch that in marble somewhere. That is the reality. So people who rail about epistemologies and different ways of learning, yes, there are different epistemologies and different ways of learning, but they're the same for all races. They're the same for the human race. So people who learn visually, so on and so forth. You're all teachers, you know the differences and you know the range of offerings that should be made. In the politics of recognition, Dr. Sarah's research showed conclusively that Indigenous Australians were still recognised and perceived as inferior to white Australians. And I'll just reflect on a contribution that I made earlier in this talk around Indigenous Australians as a resource, because that's not the highest in the hierarchy that Dr. McLennan, I recognise the work of Dr. McLennan present in the audience when he created a hierarchy of othering. The two highest were resource and trace. Now, trace gets you into that space of in loco parentis, treating the children altruistically like they're your own flesh and blood. But if that doesn't ring your bell, if that doesn't motivate you, think about Indigenous children as a resource. But I just want to recognise the fight that Dr. Sarah has fought, that perception and in Indigenous children needs to be one of pride in their identity, strong and smart. I've spoken about connectedness and I won't labour the point, but I'm quite proud of the fact that the duopoly has been identified, the fact that connectedness should be played against truancy, and truancy is something not to be entertained as a causal factor for non-attendance. Time and time again I use this model and I'll use it again today. When you point the finger at a student, three fingers point back at you. When you start to talk truancy, it's a clarion call for have a good long hard look at yourself and your school. The service guarantee is work that I championed some years ago. Amazingly, and I was absolutely flabbergasted by this. I thought it was just like the cleverest idea because it was so simple and so rallying for communities. The notion that if you had the logic that school completion made a difference in your life, was good for business to make it true. So if you're a school and you produced grade 12s that no one wanted, somehow your logic was exposed as being flawed. But if you produce grade 12s that the community clamoured over to employ, therefore your logic was buttressed, your logic was reinforced. You were telling the truth by way of education delivers better life outcomes. But recently, through some study I've been doing, I've discovered that this work is not universally my idea, and that a group of modern monetary theorists who are neo-Keynesian economists have been talking about this in the United States, in certain parts of the United States for many years, the jobs guarantee idea. And if you want to Google that, modern monetary theory or neo-Keynesian jobs guarantee, you will find a whole body of work that suggests that it makes a lot of sense to ensure or promise or guarantee jobs for your year 12s. But I want to spend the few moments I have left, about 15 or so, talking about some work that I've been doing which I think is really, really cutting edge and changes again the perspective, a perspectival switch, a way of looking at things differently by looking at the work on persuasion. Some people have umbrage with the word persuasion because they think it has some history, and please forgive me if you have umbrage with the term persuasion. But this goes to how people are motivated to change their behaviour to be in their own interests. And we've looked at a whole range of models and processes and methodologies that cause people behavioural change. And there's no greater body of work in this whole space than the retail space. And a number of times I've presented this body of work, people lampoon it a bit and say it's the "do you want fries with that order" approach. But just by way of example, leading thinkers in this space are Thaler, Sunstein and Cialdini. Thaler works for the Cameron government in the UK, Sunstein for Obama, and Cialdini is an independent researcher on the psychology of persuasion. It should be, I think, reasonably motivating to you that the two biggest economies have behavioural economics units, they're referred to, or nudge units, as they're sometimes referred to, that are within their bureaucracies, are within their governments to shift people's behaviour to better modes, such that kids will attend, kids will learn, kids will complete, kids will get jobs. That's the sort of behavioural promise that we offer. But just to prove up the point, a friend of mine owns a cafe on Beaudesert Road, large establishment serving truck drivers in the morning. Truck drivers come in, they want food, because that's what you would go into a cafe for, one would think, perhaps cigarettes. They go into the cafe, and over a long period of time they studied whether they bought a drink or not. Now if you ask them, do you want a drink? Let's roll back. When people come in and order a hamburger, about 40% of people buy a drink. If you ask them if they want a drink, it goes to about 65%. If you look them right in the eye and say, drink, yes, and don't break eye contact, it goes right through 90%. People are mesmerised by this. And even if you know this, you cannot resist it. And I cite an example of my colleague in this regard, Gary McLennan, who knows this. And if you go to buy a coffee at a coffee shop, if they go, do you want a mug? About 65%, 70% of you will go yes. If they go, mug, yes, it'll go to 95%. Now, essentially, they're selling you a few cents worth of milk for another 40, 50 cents. And when they say mug, yes, they actually mean it. Right? Now, when you say, well, yeah, but that's coffee and that's soft drinks in a roadside cafe. So we did an experiment. We got a number of primary school principals to meet and greet and farewell students each day with a script. And the farewell script was, see you tomorrow, Gary, won't we? Yes. One after, you're nodding already. You're nodding. A significant number of you are nodding. And you can't help yourself but nod. Now, you're leveraging two things there, a bit of neuro-linguistic programming, and you're also leveraging commitment and consistency, because the child, amongst his or her peers, have acknowledged that they will be there tomorrow, yes. You can't help yourself either. You're nodding. You're very... I could sell you a used car in a second. And people go, this is flim-flammery. Except that we've got research based that says if you meet and greet and farewell as the principal students each day and each afternoon, morning and afternoon, you can get as much as a 10% lift in attendance, which of course exposes the real issue around attendance, and that's that you've got to actually want them to be there. Because one of the really big issues around school attendance, the elephant in the room, is if you get them to attend, they actually attend. Right? You can't just complain about them not being attending. They actually turn up and you've got to deal with their issues. Right? Hello, it's in your own interest, particularly if you're a baby boomer, to do that. So what we did was we packaged many of the triggers for persuasion into meta-strategies that allowed people to get access to this changed way of behaviour so as to generate compliance, so that principals saw themselves as, and teachers saw themselves as, compliance professionals, getting children to go, yes, I want what you're selling. This will be good for me. rather than some 12-year-away sort of promise, which I think is good and should be there and should be guaranteed, but a 12-year-away promise that says things are going to be better for you, yeah, sure, but I'm in the now. How can you motivate me in the now in order to do this? And I'll just give the social norming one. I had a group smaller than this, but about 160 principals in a room, and I played a little trick on them because I like playing little tricks. And I gave them this story. I said, look, if you want to teach a deputy principal a lesson in social norming, get them to do this. And I said, get them in front of the whole parade and rail at the students about how messy the toilets are. Say, we're being known as the school in this district with the messiest toilets. I'm sick and tired of going into the toilets at the end of the lunch hour and seeing excrement smeared over the walls, urine all over the floor and toilet paper everywhere and the toilet's not flushed. Get your deputy principals to rail at your students angrily like that and see what happens over the next 2 or 3 days. What will happen over the next 2 or 3 days? The toilets will be the messiest you've ever seen them. They mightn't have been too bad, but if you want excrement all over the walls, you'll get it. Because what you've done is you've leveraged what's called a cascade of imitation. You've authorised compliance. Kid says, that sounds like fun. If everyone's doing it, I want to get in on that action. Now, in front of 160 principals, you could see embarrassment flush through the room. Because all of them had been at some time in their career guilty of that very sin. Describing everything in the negative as opposed to describing everything in the positive. The alternative, of course, would be to get up and congratulate the students on how well the toilets have been kept clean and how we're being regarded as the school with the cleanest toilets in the whole block. Now, you probably wouldn't do that, but you'd certainly talk about attendance in that regard. You'd certainly talk about improvements and strong and smart, perhaps, as social norming. A very, very clever framing, or the varsity way, the way we do business, or the Kerwin way, or the Tallur way. A number of schools have got this notion of the way. The way we do things around here is normed around positive things. A really good example. But I always like a bit of literature. And here's the Tom Sawyer washing the fence, scarcity. A boy doesn't get a chance every day to wash a fence. So instead of saying every child player gets a prize, how do you frame your offering in terms of scarcity or competition? Not a bad thing, but how do you frame what you offer in terms of scarcity? Look at this as a framing one. Would you go to a doctor who said 100 patients who have had this operation, 90 are alive after 5 years? Oh, I wouldn't mind that. But of 100 patients who have had this operation, 10 are dead after 5 years. Oh. I go to the comment about my mother this morning because there's an important message in here about language. I'm talking to my mum this morning, we're having breakfast because I love her to death, and she's saying, because she's a bit worried about me, like I haven't got a job next week and all of that, so I think she's concerned about herself too, because from time to time I give her the odd, sub, as you do. And not that I would accuse her of being concerned about herself, but she says, how you going today, Ian? Well, son, golden child, firstborn, you got to love it, don't you? And I said, look, it's no worries. I'm giving this presentation to the stronger, smarter, Chris Sari. Oh, I love that Chris Sari. He's a handsome man, she says. I made that bit up, Chris, but I thought you'd enjoy it. I says, it's not a problem because I've got the PowerPoint organised. And she looked at me strangely. She said, you should see your brother if you've got problems with PowerPoints. He's an electrician. And I thought to myself, no, not that kind of PowerPoint, Mum. Like a PowerPoint like Microsoft, like Gates, like he owns the world, that kind of PowerPoint. She goes, nah, see your brother, he'll help you. Language, right? I'm trying to communicate, she'll be sweet, I've got the PowerPoint organised. She's saying, look, what's wrong with the PowerPoint? Your brother's an electrician. And I'm going, we're talking in two different universes. So similarly, we send a letter home to parents saying, send your kids to school, could go to jail. I'm sure your letters say things like that. Growl, growl, growl. And the parents look at it, it's on an official letterhead. Most times they get things on official letterheads, they're pretty negative. They can't read it. Most of the words say PowerPoint, and they go, oh, what's that all about? And they put it in the bin. As opposed to simple communication using emoticons. And Thaler and Sunstein have researched this vigorously. Gary's attendance is well above the state average. Well done, Gary. Every day counts. A little smiley. I don't know why Ian has to be the bad person, but Ian has lost 10 days this term. Every day counts. A little grumpy sign. Now, just to reinforce this point, some years ago I was on the finance committee of the Lotto Corporation in this state. That's the one that hands out the gold lotto prizes, right? I was on the board of this thing. I was on the finance committee, and they used to produce the month. This is $1 billion corporation, right? $1 billion corporation. They would produce the finance reports. They would be considered for about 10 minutes, and all the anyone who teaches business stuff in this room, you'll know all the double negatives and stuff. Negatives in the debtors column. That's all a good thing, and all that kind of stuff. So there'd be a 10-minute conversation around the various lines, both vertical and horizontal and vertical. In the finance reports, and that would be it, and we'd get on to the business of the board meeting. And I said to the chief financial officer, I said, look, it'd be a really good thing if you just put, if it's good news, a smiley face, bad news, a grumpy face, and if it's neutral news, just have the mouth flat line. And the reason these are better than red, green and yellow traffic lights is because you can photocopy them in black and white. It's as practical as that. Right? That was where my thinking was. The first time the finance reports were produced with grumpy and smiley faces, 2 hours, we argued about the contents of the finance reports. So for the first time, I think the board members of $1 billion corporation actually understood what the horizontal and vertical lines meant. Prior to that, they said, oh, no, she's good, but what's the bottom line? It's bucks, we're winning, like the lotto winners, everybody's a winner here. But until such time it was communicated in such a way using emoticons that it actually meant something, people weren't prepared to discuss it. So again, research saying, send the notes home with smiley and grumpy faces on it. At least try it and see what happens. Just reflect on this for a second. Look at this.
The 24/7 marketed courtyard. More choices, more convenience, and more freedom on the road. Courtyard, it's a new stay.
I call this the married experience slide. This leverages the ego thing, right? The married experience. You get up, everything works. The whole world is designed for you. Now, just want to tell you the story about my son-in-law quickly, who's a black African man, okay? He's from the Seychelles, married to my daughter. That makes him my son-in-law. I thought I'd explain that to you. And he comes to Australia, marries my daughter, and I'm working really hard in this Indigenous space, right? Really, really hard. And he says to me, one of the most powerful comments that I've ever heard from anybody, he says, "You really don't get it." And I go, "Well, what do you mean, Roddy? I really don't get it." He said, "You're not in my skin. You don't have my lived experience." And I go, "Well, yeah, you're a handsome chap. I'm a handsome chap. We're both in Australia. It's a sort of egalitarian, feel-good kind of world." He says, "You don't get it." And I said, "Well, okay, tell me about it." And what he confronted me with was, my whole life was just pumped up by ego. You know, I'm this really, really big alpha male, white, don't mess with me kind of guy. Right? And I go through life expecting that, and it is reciprocated. I can remember at 20, 21 years of age, I wouldn't even pay to go into nightclubs that had a cover charge. Why? Because you knew full well that the bouncers would go, "Holy guacamole, don't mess with the gorilla." Right? "In he come in, please." So the whole world was designed around me, okay? And then he's in this world, and he's going, and a really big example blew up where he was working with me, and he went to one of the hotels in Cairns, and they said, "We need to secure the bottles in the thing that you never want there anyhow." And they said, we need a $200 deposit, and he put over a credit card, and they said, "We don't take credit cards from people like you, right? We don't take credit cards from people like you." So 2 weeks later, I went into the same hotel, which we use regularly for work. I put my credit card over and I said, "Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Mackie, you're a very clever chap." I went thermonuclear, as you can expect I would, and I've never darkened their doorstep again, but we don't take credit cards from you. So then I went to the Seychelles, where he is the alpha male. Everything is designed for him, and I'm just a second-class tourist who they just determined to bleed money out of. And I'm going, "This is not what I'm used to." And he says, "See, now you're starting to get it. Now you're starting to get it." So that whole business about lived experience is very important. And this business about ego, that's what's happening in successful schools. They're making kids feel good in their skin. They're making kids feel like the school is designed for them. Nothing is too much trouble. Nothing is too much trouble. And a really good example of this I saw in a school in Mount Isa, where the bell rings, it's playground time, and the music starts, and there's bells, and there's skipping, and there's balls, and there's fun galore, and everyone's having a ball. And I just compare that to my sort of schooling, and this might be the protocol in some of the schools that you've taught in, certainly not your school currently, where you've got to sort of go and beg for a football at morning. "Oh, please, can I have a football? Please, please." "No, you can't have a football. You had one 3 years ago and you lost it. You'll never get one again." I don't know how that augurs with ego. I just thought I'd finish with a couple of really great slides. There's some youngsters from Doomadgee on the OLPC thing. And here's a woman I just love to death, Auntie Pat Levy, with 3 of her adopted children who've all got university qualifications. I mean, I think there's a million words in a couple of images. Look at that. And look at that. You just got to love it, don't you? You just got to love this work. It's such a wonderful, wonderful calling. So, as I said, as of next week, I won't be in this role, but I'm not leaving this space. I'm going to just keep hammering away at making the world like I grew up in, like it worked for me. And it needs to work for all of our Aboriginal children because they're all strong and smart. Thank you so much.
Ian, I've asked especially to come up and just say thanks to you. And I'm kind of feeling in a strange place to be able to have to get up and say thanks for your efforts. Thank you for your address this morning. You've always been one who's not been afraid to think outside of the box, not been afraid to read, and you've been a white guy who's been concerned. When you had every kind of opportunity to not have to care. In the past, you've spent your time as head of the Queensland Teachers Unions and those, and we've seen other people in other such powerful positions or principals associations and not really taken such responsibility seriously about Indigenous kids. But you are a man with love in your heart for Aboriginal children and Torres Strait Islander children. So I want to just say thank you because with your courage and your commitment to be excellent yourself and your commitment to reach out for other kids at the margins and bring them in and make sure that they have the Marriott experience has been exceptional. You've never had to do that and you could have lived your life comfortably, not ever worrying. But you've not ever been that kind of a person. And your courage and your kind of innovation and commitment to be excellent as an educator and to be excellent as a man has given other such people in the room the courage to be the same. And that's not insignificant. So I don't want you to leave this job thinking that you've not made an impact, because you certainly have, and for that, from me personally, I thank you. I thank you. And can I ask the rest of you just to please stand and show your appreciation for Ian?